Good morning, Eagles. My name is Jahkazia Richardson. I am a second-year graduate student with North Carolina Central University's MSW program. I have my colleague, Katherine McKoy, who is also a second-year graduate student. And then we have Ernest with the Guardian at Litem program with Raleigh, North Carolina. So you may ask, what does Guardian ad litem have to do with child welfare? Well, Guardian ad litem is helping with advocating for children who have been brought through the court system, who are needing advocating and are needing a voice. So that is why we are bringing Ernest to kind of give his overall experience in this conversation that we are talking about today. So Katherine, if you could take it away for me.
Hello, everyone. Just to touch on the topic a little bit, filicide is defined as a person who kills their son or daughter, or the killing of one's son or daughter. And we were interested in doing this topic, discussing it further with our special guest, Ernest, because in a time of racial injustice and wanting to protect Black women and Black men, we cannot forget to protect Black children. This discussion will shine light on filicide's presence in the Black community and how we can go about protecting our community, our children, and our future. I'll let Jahkazia continue with our prompting questions for this discussion.
Do you think the perspective of Black culture has changed the way Black parenting has kind of been seen in our culture, in the community?
The perspective of Black culture when it comes to our line of work, and I'm only referring to Child Protective Services, it seems like the perspective in my eyes has over the years changed, and I can go a little bit further into that. As a
Okay.
social worker, I'm kind of dating myself here, but going back a few years as a social worker, one of the bigger issues that I've always saw was just the sheer numbers of children of color that was in care. The amount of reports that we've received, now also I was a social worker here in North Carolina as well as from my home state of Pennsylvania, and I noticed that in the areas there was a huge disproportionate number of African American children or children of color in foster care. Also, too, the reports that were made specifically were a lot higher. A lot of those reports, in regards to physical discipline. So, we're just specifically talking about physical discipline when children are beaten and, either with a belt or, a switch or a drop cord or whatever you want to call it. It seemed like once those reports came in, the outlook of it was so horrible. It was, you know, as professionals, it was like, oh my God, how can somebody do this? But then I'm thinking to myself, being a Black male and being raised in in a single parent home, that's kind of what the discipline was, but that's what I know, and so coming from my perspective as compared to what my colleagues' perspective was, it seemed like there was always a black eye on any reports that came in, especially when it came to physical discipline. I think, and this is just my personal opinion, just even in my current role, I feel that the perspective has not changed in regards to how um, people of color or black culture children, they're looked at, and as well as their parents are looked at as compared to even 15 years ago. I don't think that there's really a true change. Um, and that was actually a good question that you had brought up. This first question is because just thinking back and just reading some of the petitions that we have coming in, and just like
Right.
kind of listening to some people who may have not been raised that way. It's just it's eye opening sometimes to see this perspective. So I don't think that it has changed. Just to kind of answer that question, I don't think
Yeah.
that the perspective has changed.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
Does the disregard of Black life affect parents to the point where it has an impact on abuse on the children and violence and fatal family violence, filicide?
Yeah, so and that's actually a good question. So it's kind of one of those things where you look at it in the perspective of Black children growing up now, more specifically Black young males, they face they face adversity not only in the home, but they also face it obviously when they go out into the community. In regards to just just the violence in general. I think that how it's perceived, to especially on the news and different things like that.
Yeah.
And I can share a story. It's one of those things where it seems like the general public do not, it seems like they don't, it's not really as big of an issue as it should be. And what I'm saying about that is like, every night on the news, I watch the news, and, there's always some type of violent incident, and, areas, it doesn't really matter about areas, but there's always some type of violent crime that has happened, and it seems like there's not really a community outcry. And I'm not saying just in general. I'm even talking about in the Black community. It seems like now it seems like there's more of a push because there's more social media presence with a lot of the unlawful killings that has happened. But but just in general, when a lot of people watch the news, this is not something that's spoken about. It's like, oh yeah, that's supposed to happen, or that's supposed to happen in that neighborhood because it's all, it's primarily low income, Black, families or whatever the situation is. But if you look at it as a whole, and this is a thing that's probably happened over the years, most of the time when you do hear violent incidences on the news, people really don't care, or they really don't do anything about the fact that these things are maybe happening right down the street from them. So for me, it does affect, I think it affects the family unit, or whatever is the definition of a family unit in most Black homes. I think that it does affect that in many ways. Criminally, I think that it affects it with the cycle of violence. If be it domestic violence, your mother is dating, several, different men, or whatever the situation is, even going down to as a young Black person trying to be accepted in the community as as an individual, and then wind up going down the wrong road and getting connected with gangs and different things like that. So to circle back, the I think that the major answer is that there it seems to be not too many people who actually care. Because it's not affecting them directly. And I don't know how to explain that more. Like, it's not like, if it's not affecting me directly, then I really don't care. And I don't really feel that I should do anything about it. And this is something that I've seen in professionals, even some of my colleagues that I work with, it seems like they do just their job and that's it. And if they didn't have this job, would they actually do any type of community outreach or even try to figure out a solution?
It sounds like there's a lot of desensitization.
And it is one of those things where, what is the solution? When it does come to that.
This was brought on by the same information. That information will be included in the link if you want to take a look at it. But it says that fatal child abuse risk factors include, just to name a few, because there were a lot, maternal young age, maternal race identified as Black or minority, maternal education, being less than high school, maternal drug and alcohol abuse, multiple births, child race identified as Black, male children, younger children, intimate partner violence in families, unrelated adults living in-house, and family living in poverty. Can you make the connection to how one or more of these factors can increase the risk for fatal violence against children in the home?
In regards to increase violence against children, the one, and I'm just talking about just what I see personally, multiple births, definitely, also just having children born to teenage parents, to have their, the grandmother raised the child, or someone else raised the child. That's always been an issue. The bigger issue too is, and this is something that it took a while for me to actually it to click in my head. And it should be a no-brainer. Living in poverty, a lot of times people learn to survive. They learn to adapt to their harsh surroundings. But the bigger issue is that there's always a cycle. So what happens is that you have grandmom who's living in poverty, then her daughter lives in poverty, then a child is living in poverty. And it's like, is this cycle that happens over and over and over and over again. Drug and alcohol abuse is obviously, a leader, as well as mental health. I mean, we haven't really touched on mental health, but drug and alcohol, not just with children who are able to fend for themselves, but also to unborn children who are subjected to the harsh chemicals and punishment of alcohol, fetal alcohol syndrome, as well as, just being born positive to multiple, a list of drugs, which they would have to be then detoxed, and already the very first breath they've taken in this world, they're already at a disadvantage because they have a long road ahead of them, especially when it comes to recovery. When it comes to drugs, parents leave for days on end, leave a 4 or 5 year old in charge of their younger siblings, and then it's one of those things where, I mean, how good of a plan is that really? I mean, a lot of times when you have multiple children, a lot of parents don't have the resources to care for their children, so they don't have minimum food supply or anything like that. So that's where the increase of children being targeted and children being abused, comes into play. All of those options could be extremely fatal. Even down to when a child is born positive to alcohol or even some type of drug, not all the time they make it. Not all the time they make it out alive. And that's probably one of the most heartbreaking things when you actually look at everything as a whole. And drugs and alcohol really it is not specific to one race, but I'm just referring to when it comes to the Black community, that can be a huge issue. Mental health, and this is something that is always up for debate. In the Black community, that's something that I feel that is not discussed. If somebody has issues, mental health issues, it's like, well, no, we don't talk about that. I'll go to therapy. I'm not going to go to therapy. And it seems like it's a black eye if you even seek out mental health help. And what happens is that for a lot of the parents that we deal with on our cases who are Black, if they were told and if they were educated and given the resources of how effective this could be, we may have a different outcome rather than resistance from day one.
Yes.
So, for me, I think that, if there was some more education when it comes to, okay, yeah, I made a mistake. I used drugs. I did this, to get that help, we would have a different outcome. So I'm always about outcomes. I'm always trying to figure out what's the best outcome. How can we change this cycle? And sometimes you can, but sometimes because it is ingrained so deep and so many generations back, that you really can't break that cycle. When it comes to living in poverty, adults living back into the home, that is not your siblings or somebody else, it's just a bunch of people living in a house. All of those increases a child's risk for some type of abuse, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, just all across the board. So I just think if there was more resources and more education, I think that we wouldn't see as much bad things as we do see when it comes to those type of makeups of homes.
And doing our research about filicide, it's like a lot of the research was 10, 15, 20 years old. And it's like these conversations, especially, national conversations, but especially in our communities, aren't being brought to light or aren't being prioritized as important. And so you kind of you touched on, as far as my next question, regarding, what do you believe is an effective measure? I know we talked about therapy and resources, but I guess away from that, what can we do as social work students? What can we do as people just walking around in our communities who maybe don't even have children? What can we do to reduce family, the killings of Black and brown children?
So, I mean, that's actually, that's a good question. It seems like the only time we really get a reaction about something is if something extreme happens, and we should be we should be being proactive and not reactive. And I think that, and I think we're all guilty of this. I think that we need to be more proactive rather than reactive when it comes to that. In a perfect world, I think that those things would prevent a lot of the fatal violence that happens.
Wow, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you taking that time, taking the time out to really bring it all full circle. And I know you said that there's a lot of volunteer opportunities. I guess this is a great opportunity to talk about the Guardian Ad Litem program and how people could, potentially become volunteers through that. So if you could share if someone is interested in doing that.
If anybody out there who is interested, I would highly encourage you to, whatever county you're from, just reach out to the Guardian Ad Litem program and, just talk to a supervisor there and see if it may fit you.
Perfect. Well, I will put that information in the description. If you guys have any questions, I am also a Guardian Ad Litem. So if you have any questions in regards to that, you can reach out.